We'll be starting in just a minute as we and to try to keep everybody on track, we will start right now. And we'll let more people join us as we go along. So first of all, thank you for joining us on this beautiful day, the first beautiful day we've had in a long time, without rain, without freezing cold temperatures. So we're glad you're willing to spend some time with us. We think this is going to be a very, very interesting topic. So hopefully you'll enjoy it. I'm going to introduce John Weidenhammer, who is the chair of the Berks Alliance, and he'll do some brief welcoming remarks, and then I'm going to steal the microphone again. John.
Got to take myself off of mute. Good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining our program today. As Dave said, my name's John Weidenhammer, and I am the chair of the Berks Alliance, and we are a collaboration of anchor institutions in Berks County with a focus on community development. And this topic for today is particularly important because so many people are considering buying electric vehicles. In fact, I read somewhere recently that of those folks that are considering buying a new car or a car, 50% are considering buying an electric vehicle, which is really pretty profound. So the way we move around, I think, is about to change in a pretty seismic kind of a way. And what a lot of people don't realize is that headquartered right here in Berks County is EnerSys, which is one of the leaders in providing power systems for electric mobility. And Jorn is going to talk a little bit more about that. But we think this topic is timely. We're also looking to follow up on this presentation with some others that just talk about what are the changes that are going to be necessary in the electric power grid in order to power all of the electric vehicles that are going to come on stream here relatively soon. And we think that that's a pretty profound activity. So thanks for joining us. We really appreciate everybody's support. We're going to keep doing these spotlight programs and also our community conversations as we go forward in time. So Dave, I'll turn it back to you to introduce our presenter and also to talk about some of the ground rules. But again, thanks for being with us.
Great. Thank you, John. Yeah, let me cover the ground rules first. What we do is ask everybody to mute your microphone while the program's going on. We'd like you to turn on your camera so we can see we're talking to real people. We will record this program and post it on the Berks Alliance website on BCTV, and we will share it with everyone who registers for the event. One of the things we've discovered over the last several months is that there are a lot of people who register aren't able to join us during this time period, but do watch the videos when they do have time. So we're pleased that we have a bigger audience than what it might appear to be. We'd ask you to use the chat function, which you can find at the bottom of the screen, to submit your questions and comments. And when we get done with the formal presentation, we'll get to those questions. So please think about creative things and interesting things you want to know more about. We're really pleased, as John said, to have Jorn Tinnemeyer join us today to do the presentation. Jorn is Senior Vice President, sorry, didn't promote you enough. Senior Vice President and Chief Technology Officer at EnerSys, where he's held that position since October 2017. He is responsible for global engineering, global quality, and technology development, and his primary focus includes energy storage systems, system design optimization, safety topologies, and control theory. He currently also serves as the chairman of NOTVAT, North America's foremost organization to foster advanced energy storage systems, and literally just dropped off a national phone call to join us today. So Jorn, thank you for doing that, and we'll turn it over to you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, David and John, for inviting me for this discussion. It's a topic very near and dear to my heart. I've been in the business designing batteries for over 20 years, not here at EnerSys. Prior to this, I was at CATL, which is right now the world's largest lithium-ion company. I've designed battery packs for BMW, for some and other German and European major automotive companies. And it's absolutely amazing of what we're trying to accomplish here at EnerSys and trying to foster this in the industrial area. Just a little bit of, for people to understand also what we're doing here at the Technology Center. We've hired a lot of people here into Berks County, bringing in talent, bringing in and a lot of engineering staff that's come in, and a lot of brand new families that are coming in. So we're really trying to push what we can do in Berks County and try to enrich the community. And one of the things, and I'm just the show pony for the team, and they're the ones that are creating all of this. They've done a fantastic job, and I get the pleasure today to show to you exactly what that team has been working on. So what I'll do is cover very quickly of a motivation of why we're looking at this, why even EnerSys, why is EnerSys looking at this particular subject area. You'll see also a video of how we want to try to put all this together, and then I'm very open to have your discussion or your thoughts and discussion and whatever concerns that you may have, and hopefully I can answer those questions for you. So with that, I'll dive right into the presentation. And hopefully everyone can see my screen. Perfect. Okay. So just very quickly, just to get a snapshot on what we are and who EnerSys is, we're a $3.3 billion company. That's estimated revenue for 2022. We have about 22% market share in the areas that we play in. And I'll go into that into a little bit more detail of what we consider our market share. We have about 5,000 employees here in the United States. Most of those are actually in the state of Missouri, where we have 3 different plants. But we do operate other plants in other states. Here within Pennsylvania, in particular here in Berks, of course, we have our technology center, where a lot of the products are being developed and designed. And then we also have finance, and the Americas sales is also contained here within Berks. Nationwide, we have about 750 service teams, and that becomes important when we start to think about these charging stations and moving into the future. The technologies, what does EnerSys do? We're not just a lead acid company. Obviously, that's built us. That's our heritage. That's where we came from. It still pays for our bills. So this is a large proportion of our revenue still comes in from this technology. But of course, lithium is coming in, and that's what started this entire revolution, or the electrification of vehicles that's coming in. So it didn't just, obviously everyone knew this from their cell phones, and as they move to different types of technologies, finally you start to move into their laptops. You may have a power tool now at home that has a lithium cell. And this lithium cell technology is also now enabling transportation. And the big difference between lithium and lead-based systems is that you just can contain so much more energy in that much smaller volume. Another very large part of what we do at EnerSys is power electronics and power conversion. We've done this for decades. We've pushed them, and this works in unison with a lot of the markets that we serve, for instance, for motive power. So when you think about forklifts, those forklifts need to be charged, and we design and build that charging equipment. Same thing for telecom. We also design and build the rectifier. So all the power conversion that's done to make sure to take that grid level voltage, the voltage that you're used to, that's in your wall plug, and converting that into something that can control and charge batteries. Broadband, some of you might be viewing this today off of cable TV. EnerSys supplies 95% of the power and backup for that cable broadband network within the United States. So that's not only just the power, but also the battery systems that's inside of that. You may have also recently heard the James Webb telescope that was launched. This is another thing. That is our battery on that telescope, and that is offering to be probably the premier telescope that we have right now, and it successfully moved through most of its stages at this point. Other areas that we work in, of course, is over-road trucking. We do produce some starter batteries, and we also are working into some renewables. If you start to think about the question about electric vehicles, and if we look at forklifts, of which we have a very significant market share here in North America, and if you think about a distribution center, they'll have literally hundreds of these forklifts. And if you see them sitting there against that wall, you start to think, well, that's not much different than my electric vehicle that I'm hooking up to my charger. In fact, I'll go into a little bit more detail that what we're doing in these industrial locations is actually a little bit more complicated than what you would find in the public space. So we know how to produce these in some very harsh environments at very high volume. So that's one piece of the story. The other piece of the story is that we are already building lithium systems and much larger lithium systems. So it's very easy for us to start to combine this technology and start to look at a brand new space, charging electric vehicles. If we look about electric vehicles, and John already mentioned this, a lot of people are making decisions right now. Are they going to decide towards an electric vehicle or are they not? In a lot of cases, when they don't want to buy an electric vehicle, the reason why they don't choose to do so is because of range anxiety. Can I charge up my vehicle? Am I able to take that trip? What happens if my fuel is low, if my electric charge is low, where can I stop? How long do I need to go to this stop? So all of these questions that people have, should I really pay a premium for a vehicle that to me, that could sound a little bit inconvenient for me to use. And this is really what's holding back that adoption of electric vehicles. The plus side on this, and we all see it today, you know, if you look at the price of gasoline, it's as high as it is, you don't have to worry about that. You can just drive on by and laugh at those people. Or you can charge the system at home, for instance. The other thing is that a typical engine has about 2,000 moving parts. A typical electric vehicle engine has about 20. So the reliability of these vehicles is significantly higher than it is for your standard internal combustion engine car. And we're starting to see a lot more demand being placed on the grid as a result of this, potentially in the future. And it's exactly also what John was saying is what is the impact to that? And we also have some solutions that we're working on at the same time. We don't want to solve one problem and leave another problem. We'd like to solve that looking at a set of solutions, as we call it, an energy ecosystem. You can start to see from here that picture really starting to build up. In North America alone, it was about 2.3%, really low numbers, but it's 4.4% is starting to increase. We're starting to see this exponential incline starting to improve in the population of these vehicles. People always ask, when is the tipping point of when we start to switch? I think we passed that tipping point. If you look at the investment that people are placing into lithium plants to provide all the batteries for these electric vehicles, the money that, say, a GM, a Ford, a Stellantis, a Toyota, a Honda is putting into this, these are hundreds of billions of dollars are literally placed into these markets. In essence, the boats are burnt. This is the direction the automotive companies are moving into. It is no longer a question of if, but when and how fast that acceleration curve starts to happen. This just gives a snapshot of the first, within the next 3 years, and what already has been produced of electric vehicles and how quickly you can charge them. And this starts to become really important. Today, you drive by a gas station and you can fuel up your vehicle in 3 to 5 minutes. And with that, you can continue driving for another 300 to 400 miles. If you look at these smaller chargers, these class level 1 and level 2, and I'll explain that a little bit better. If you drive up to this level 1 charger, you can start fueling up for 300 to 400 miles in 16 hours. 16 hours, 3 to 4 minutes. Not very convenient. The good thing is they're a lot more ubiquitous. You can start to see them all over the place. Just the Giant right now, which is close to where my house is you're starting to see Volta placing in these chargers, for instance. So you're starting to see this. But the problem is, if you go to these places and you charge up and you go in and you do your shopping for 10, 15 minutes and you come back and you see, for instance, on these smaller chargers that you've only really added another mile or 2 miles. Is it worth it? Is it worth it to put into that, to attach your vehicle to that charger, or does that just become an inconvenience? And this is where the power of the charger becomes very important. And the way the power is done is in a terminology called kilowatts. So for instance, your range at home may use 3 to 4 kilowatts if you have an electric range. A typical television will use about 120 to 200 watts, so 0.2 of a kilowatt. What we're trying to do at EnerSys is charge at 150 kilowatts. A typical home will have about 22 kilowatts of power, maximum, with air conditioners running and everything else. So when you plug in a vehicle using 150 kilowatts, that's like placing all of a sudden 23 homes onto the grid, everyone with their air conditioners running, and that's massive impacts on the grid. How do you supply all of that power, right? I mean, you have so much power, for instance, going to your house. How would you ever supply 150 or 23 homes worth of power into that home? So the infrastructure needs to be built up for this, and that's a large part of the problem. And so this is what we call then a level 1 and level 2 charger. So these are the types of chargers that are typically out in the field right now. A level 1 is something that you would have in your house. It would be a wall plug. You may spend a little bit more money, maybe another $5,000 or so, and then you can use a charger that uses, for instance, a very similar plug that your dryer is connected into. And from here, you can increase that charge rate to about 15 kilowatts, depending upon the vehicle that you have. In all of these cases, if you look at that picture in the vehicle, there's what we call an onboard charger. And what that means is when you think about these chargers, they're not really chargers. They're just meters. They're smart switches. They take in the power from the grid and bring it into the vehicle. And because you're limited by the system in the vehicle, you're limited by the power that can go in. So the vehicle is limiting you, but also your fuses at home are limiting you. They might limit you to just 7 kilowatts. And then all of a sudden, now you're charging for 16 hours if you have to charge up your entire vehicle, and nobody really wants that. It might be convenient enough if every night that you plug in, but what if you lived in a multifamily dwelling? What if you lived in an apartment building? You can't run an extension cord from your kitchen all the way down to the vehicle that's sitting on the side of the road. I mean, there'd be massive issues, obviously, with something like that. So this is something you can't do. What if you had some charging stations on the road, but then you drove in and you weren't able to find the one that you needed? So how many do we need to start to place? If you think about garages, and you think about it, you're driving, say, even downtown Reading into one of the main larger garages. That garage was never built for massive power. It was built for lighting. It has very limited infrastructure that goes to that building. So imagine if all of a sudden we wanted to add 50 chargers to that building. We couldn't do it. To that garage, the overall larger garage system, you couldn't supply the power to it. So what we're doing at EnerSys, in order to supply that fast DC charging, first of all, let's go back to the vehicle. We connect directly to the battery of the vehicle. We bypass that charger that sits inside of it, and we give the battery as much power as it can take. And so we have very special protocols and work that we do with the OEMs in order to connect directly to the vehicle, to the vehicle's battery. So this gets rid of the barrier that the vehicle is giving us. So we can push in so much more electricity, but we have to do that extraordinarily safely. The last thing you want to do is you hook up to an EnerSys charger and there goes your car and it's blown up. So we want to make sure that these systems are extraordinarily safe. The other thing is we need to make sure that they're highly reliable. And that's also where our service network that I mentioned comes into. If you go to China right now, China probably has more chargers than any other place in the world. The problem in China is you have a 60% chance that the charger you drive up to doesn't work. So how many times would you drive up to a charger? Now you've got your range anxiety. You want to get home. You only have 20 miles left, but you have to charge up your vehicle. You finally find that charger and you plug it in and there it is. It's not working. Something's wrong with it. So you have to have a service organization that can cover this. We already have a service organization. We have that ability that we can react within 24 hours. And so that gives you then that reliability. And that's again where EnerSys comes in and looking at everything that we have to bear as a company to solve this particular problem. This is what one of these stations starts to look like. So you can see in front end is what we call our DC pedestals. These pedestals, think of them just like the gas station that you have that you pull up to. In this case, rather than pumping gasoline, you're now pumping electrons. And those electrons are now coming into your vehicle. I mentioned already that 150 kilowatts, it's an awful lot of power. The way that we solve this is that box that you see in the background. And that's an energy storage system. That is filled up with batteries. And so what we're doing is constantly filling those batteries with power. When a vehicle comes up, it then dumps that electricity at very high rates. So this means that you can have a relatively cheap connection, grid connection, a very common grid connection to the energy storage system, but still be able to charge all these electric vehicles. It allows you, if you had a parking garage, it allows you to now charge those 50 vehicles because you can use that energy storage system to charge up when the vehicles aren't there or when most of them are full, and then again provide that energy back into the vehicles again. It'll also allow you that, for instance, in a facility like EnerSys was never built to have all of these electric vehicles. If we all of a sudden had 50% of our employees buy electric vehicles, how would we ever charge them? The way that we would do it is by setting up one of these energy storage systems. During nighttime, we bring in all the cheap electricity, we fill up that energy storage system, and that way we can supplement the grid power with the energy that's stored here in order to provide that to all of our employees if we were to do that and were to grow with this. And this is a very large part. Not only is it expensive to bring those grid lines, which can cost actually millions of dollars for every mile that's coming in, but the permitting that's required. If you think about older city cores, there is no way you're going to rip open that street in order to put in more power. You need to solve that problem, and energy storage is the way that we think starts to solve that problem, and starts to solve that problem of connecting all of a sudden those 23 homes. In this case, you don't have to do it. It's very levelized power. The other thing is that in certain states, you're starting to see what's called peak shaving or peak pricing or real-time pricing of electricity. And this will eventually come where we actually have to pay in real time what the demand is. If the demand is higher, say it's a really hot day in August and the electricity costs are higher because everyone is turning on their air conditioning loads, the electric companies in certain states start to raise the electric price in real time. What we can do with that energy storage system is we can make an intelligent decision to say, should we use the grid power? How much is that costing me? Or how much did I charge up that power in my energy storage system overnight that's much cheaper? And then supplement that. And so not only am I now providing convenience for charging, but I'm now also reducing your electric bill and making that electric signature much more effective. I'm also helping the grid rather than all of these cars going on and off and these massive powers. I mean, you can imagine what this is doing to the grid. It was never designed for this. We keep the power demand really nice and level, which is exactly what the electric providers want and what that grid was designed to do. So it helps them also in this aspect. The other thing that we can do is start to think about how we charge those vehicles. So we're putting in a lot of software into these systems. So if I go back to the EnerSys example, and we had those 50 vehicles standing there all being charged, well, if I'm smart about it, I don't have to charge them all at the same time. If I have one person and say, and I can look into his Outlook calendar and I know that that person's going to a meeting or that person's going to lunch, I can make sure that that vehicle is charged up. But the other person who's staying here for lunch, I can charge that vehicle and I can wait till the end of the day. And I can start to manage that power flow going back and forth. So it creates this very intelligent charging system. So now I have a system that now, because of the high power, I can charge the vehicle in very limited time. I can probably add within 15 minutes up to 80 miles into that vehicle. Now it makes sense. Now when I do my grocery shopping In the 50 minutes that I'm in there, I now put 80 miles of range onto my vehicle. That's a lot better than those 1 or 2 miles that I'm putting on. Now it's worthwhile for me to do this. If I can't find that charging point on the street, if I'm in a multi-unit dwelling and I have to park on the roadway and I don't have the opportunity to charge, I can then go up to these fast chargers and charge them really quickly. Again, it gives me this convenience of much more of how a gas station works today, solving to a certain degree the anxiety issue, the range anxiety that people have. And of course, with EnerSys providing overall that energy management, it provides us brand new revenue avenues. With that service offering, it provides us the ability to service those customers. We can do this nationwide. And because we're a global company, this is not just an American solution, but it's a global solution, which gives us great export capability. And again, all of that designed here in Berks County. So let me finish off with this video.
As the world focuses on addressing climate
Can
change,
you hear the sound?
support is growing for a rapid transition to lower carbon power generation and transportation. Increasing the use of electric vehicles is one way to sharply reduce a significant source of carbon emissions. To speed this transition to EVs, major jurisdictions aim to ban the sale of new fossil fuel passenger vehicles within the next 5 to 15 years. With this imminent shift to electric vehicles comes an urgent demand for fast, cross-EV brand-compatible charging stations where drivers shop, work, and travel. EnerSys is proud to introduce a truly turnkey solution to this infrastructure challenge with our DC fast charging system that turns charging hours into charging minutes, integrated with our on-site lithium battery energy storage. We call it the EnerSys Optimized Energy Station, or OES. We designed OES for commercial sites and workplaces to cost-effectively meet the growing demand for EV fast charging. Integrating our lithium battery with the DC fast charger enables quick charging of electric vehicles while reducing utility demand charges and potentially eliminating costly grid upgrades. Our modular design makes EnerSys OES scalable, future-proofing your installation with the ability to add charging stations as more EVs hit the road. Our optimized energy station benefits EV drivers and site owners alike. For EV drivers, OES provides the convenience of fast charging at locations where they shop, work, and travel. For retailers, giving customers the ability to add over 80 miles of range in the time it takes to purchase a cup of coffee will make theirs the store of choice. Imagine your visitors being able to fully charge their vehicles at your workplace during a meeting, and your employees able to quickly add miles of range to accommodate an unexpected change in their evening commute, all while minimizing impact to your electric bill. In addition to charging, our optimized energy station offers commercial site owners optional applications that may enhance revenue to improve returns on charging investments. To optimize energy cost, OES uses predictive analytics and artificial intelligence to determine the most favorable time to purchase power from the grid. Artificial intelligence also directs OES stored energy to vehicle charging, to power the site, or back to the grid in real time, optimizing the battery system to lower electricity costs, which can improve profitability. On-site solar power can be integrated to further reduce carbon emissions and cost of electricity. And OES can be configured to supply backup power to critical loads should the grid go down, potentially saving thousands of dollars. Our optimized energy station is an innovative solution that seamlessly integrates time-saving charging into EV drivers' daily routines, provides exciting new commercial and cost-saving opportunities for site owners, and most of all, helps protect our planet. At EnerSys, as the global leader in energy storage solutions, we're committed to powering the future, everywhere, for everyone.
So who wants to buy an electric car?
We did a quick poll. And there was some interest. But some of the questions that you raised were some of the issues that people had. How frequently are they going to have to get it charged? How far will the cars go? How reliable is it to find a place to get them charged. So I think, but it was good. I think if I did my polling right, probably about 10 to 12% of the people in this audience said they were seriously thinking about getting their next car to be an electric car.
Very good. Very good.
So, bunch of questions, Jorn. These you're looking to install these at a variety of different locations, existing gas stations, perhaps, rest stops, perhaps.
Exactly. So the first piece would be to provide, again, that experience very similar that users have right now when they go to a gas station. And I think it'll turn into a service station of what we heard of what you start to see right now for the sheets and so forth, where you can walk in, buy something for lunch or what have you, or your breakfast. And while you're doing that, if you have that extra 10 minutes, it gives you then sufficient level of charge then potentially to last you your whole day. Most people's drives, most people's commutes on average are about 25 miles. So 50 miles back and forth, if you get that 60, 70 miles into during that charge period, that might be sufficient. The other thing is it's a driver. So for instance, if you're a coffee shop and you want people to loiter in that 10, 15 minutes, it's a real driver for them to have that there. It's another feature of them to come. Same thing if you're a store owner, a CVS, a pharmacy, or what have you. It allows you to think, if I had that extra 5 minutes, I can get those more miles in. I'll take a look a little bit more in the store and buy a few more things. So we start to see this, first of all, as gas stations, grocery stores, these sort of locales will start to have these types of fast chargers. The second one will be restaurants. You can start to think about, if I spend an hour at a restaurant, if I had the ability to charge my vehicle there as well, that would provide that additional benefit for me to go. If I'm an electric car and I'm choosing between two different restaurants, but restaurant A doesn't have a charger, but restaurant B does, and I'm able to fast charge there, I would probably want to go to restaurant B as long as it serves the food that I like. So that's another potential avenue, because as we start to think about charging, it starts to become very different than fueling our vehicles. But our first order is to look at how people fuel today, which is gas stations. Our second piece is, where do people want to spend their time? Where do companies want to make sure that customers spend their time? And then start to look at things like auxiliary places like restaurants and so forth. And then obviously garages, municipalities will start to place these type of systems in. So that's how we think the growth will start to move forward.
Obviously, it probably wouldn't be something you'd think about buying for your house, but it might be something you could do at an apartment complex or something like that. Absolutely right.
It's and a lot of, you think about these older complexes that may not have the power capability. I mean, can you imagine you're in a building that was, maybe 30, 40 years old, and then 5 people, 10 people come in after 5 o'clock or 6 p.m. and everybody wants to charge their vehicle. And so there's a solution to that. They'll give these nifty apps and say, well, I'll start my charge a little bit later. I'll charge it at 2 a.m. or 4 a.m. in the morning when the power is available. But if I have to leave again at 6 a.m. in the morning, I only have 2 hours of that charging time. And so I may not accumulate sufficient charge at that point. So they may want to have in that apartment building also an energy storage system. And then that energy storage system could also help the energy signature of that building. It's something that we called grid interactive efficient buildings. And there's a lot of work being done by the federal government, which then looks at the next problem of grid stability. So we're solving that issue then as well to a certain degree.
Yeah, there would be obviously challenges to the grid if everybody started using electric cars. How do people pay for this? And what do they pay for this?
A lot of cases, they have companies that you would apply a card for. And so you would have a card in your wallet and you would just go up to the unit. We actually have one here at the Technology Center. And so certain employees who have an electric car, they just walk up, we provide them this card. And so here, of course, for us, it's free, and certain companies will provide that as a service to their employees. But there's certain places, Blink is one of these companies, Volt is another one, that provide a membership, and with that membership, you can then pay for these type of charging networks. In the future, what we're seeing a lot of vehicles, and you don't even have to go out with your card anymore. Once you attach the charger to your vehicle identifies who you are and it's charged immediately. It's the ultimate level of convenience. You just plug it in. And then the next peak that we're starting to work on already is with wireless capability. If you start to think about more into the future, autonomous vehicles and so forth, then those will be charged wirelessly and you don't even have to plug anything anymore. So not only do you have to put a pay in, you don't have to plug anything in, you just park somewhere and it charges.
Wow, that's amazing to think about. It's just sort of mind-blowing. What about hybrid cars? Do they fit into this equation in any way?
They do. There's something called plug-in hybrid electrics. And so they still have a gasoline engine in them, but then they also have a power plant, a battery power plant. In certain cases, so what happens here is when they work in unison with one another, and in certain cases, when the battery starts to wear out, then you can go fully on an internal combustion engine again. The problem is that your hybrid is no longer that efficient. If you're constantly driving with that really heavy battery and the battery is not supporting that drive, you're actually starting to waste more gas and actually putting more CO2 in the atmosphere than a vehicle that isn't a hybrid. And that's the problem with them. And that's where the fast charging could again help, because we can quickly charge that battery to make most efficient use of that battery within that vehicle.
We've had a couple questions about if somebody wanted to install one at a business that they have, what's it cost to do this? How much capacity, how much space do they need? What sorts of resources do they have to provide for it?
Sure. In a lot of cases, it's just standard power that you would have at your facility. So if you were, say, a grocery store, you would have access to approximately 30 kilowatts. And that's all the entrance power that you start to need to start to charge that battery. The battery that you saw there and that we're building, you can see it's about 9 feet by 6 feet. That's the smallest footprint that we have. And we have different sizes that can stack on top of that. So it's highly modular. And the pedestal can stand directly in front of that parking slot that you come in. It's very lean, it's very small. We also have what we call our slim pedestal that could fit more, say, in underground lots where you may be a little bit more space constrained. In terms of cost, I'm only the engineer. I build these things, I don't price them, so.
It's somebody else's job.
Exactly.
You talked about it, but I want to see if you come back and talk a little bit more about this. One of the attractions here is that there's the capacity to do sort of reverse engineering and get the electricity you're generating and put that back on the grid, which is a way of creating some financial resources for the person who owns there or has it installed there. Can you talk about that a little bit more, how that works and what you're talking about? Is it going to recoup the full cost of the project or what?
Sure. I mean, maybe let me start with what the grid is. The grid is the world's largest supply chain with zero inventory. And that's how you really have to start to think about electricity. If you think about the electricity that you're using, unless you're working on this on a laptop and purely on a stored electric power, but if you're connected to the grid, that electricity was really just generated, a second ago. So so you're using electricity almost immediately of when it was generated. And so the electric grid has been designed in such a way to allow the largest peaks that exist, which is typically in the summertime when all the air conditioning loads are on and it's still midday and industry is running, to allow for those peaks and then a little bit of buffer sitting on top of those peaks. Imagine if we built all our highway systems for peak traffic on the worst possible days, Memorial Day weekend, and we've got peak traffic occurring. We don't build our highways this way, but this is currently how the grid is built. So if we start to place in all of these chargers and we use that same approach, that same strategy, we would really have to expand the grid, and that would cost literally trillions of dollars. So there's got to be a much more clever way of doing this. And the clever way of doing this is by adding energy storage into all of these different places. So then when these peaks start to occur, rather than say, oh, I need to put on another peaker plant, which might have very high costs, or I might not even have the peaker plant available to me, I could potentially draw upon the energy stored or the energy stored in these storage systems and push that back onto the grid again. And something like this, which we call bidirectional capability, we can actually sell the electricity back into the grid in what's called a virtual power plant. With software, we place all of these energy storage systems together, and they act just like you would have a gas-fired plant or a nuclear plant. They would store all of this electricity, and in times of need, on a request, can push that electricity back into the grid again. Like anything, electric pricing has a real-time value associated with it. So if I generated that via solar, or if I generated that at a very low-level power cost, say in the middle of the night, and now I push it out into the grid when the costs are relatively high, I can start to generate some revenue on this. And depending upon where I live geographically, depending upon the constraints of the grid, is there a lot of power supply? Is there a lot of grid connection in this geographical location? What is the climate like? Is it very hot right now? Then you can start to figure out how quickly will the system pay for itself. In the past, a lot of people tried to make money just on this alone. And it was a very tough slog, particularly here. I mean, I always say, if you can sell energy storage in the state of Pennsylvania, you can probably sell it anywhere in the world. Because our costs here are relatively low, and you don't have these type of peak demand charges that you say, for instance, have in New York State, or that you would say, for instance, have in California. So it doesn't, the value generation is not enough. And that's where the charging and so forth, a concept called application stacking, really has value. So now if I pay for people for charging, if I pay for that backup power, if I pay then for that demand charge reduction, if I pay for those peak charge demands, all of a sudden my return on this, my return on investment is reduced a lot faster than it would be if I only used one of those particular applications. So as we put on more and more electric vehicles, people will need more and more of our energy storage systems. So keep on buying those electric vehicles.
I've got a bunch of questions about things you could do at home, but I'm going to come back to those in a minute. Talk about the durability of both of the power chargers and the durability of the batteries.
Sure, it's a question a lot of people have is when you think about an electric car, and I'll start there because it's really the same cells in the end, it's the same batteries. How long will my electric car last? And the data that's coming back from some of the OEMs is that how quickly the battery is degrading is a lot slower than they initially thought it was. Our systems, we believe, will last easily where you don't have to make any changes for about 10 years is what our data starts to look at. So we have a lot of data which is called cycle life, so the amount of times you can cycle your battery. And you can think about your cell phone. Your cell phone, you know, after about a year, it starts to really heat up the back of the phone, and then as it gets older, it heats up more and more and more. And that's when we want to start to replace the battery relatively quickly. And you don't want that happening to your car. The last thing that you want is as you use your car more and more, because that battery is 1,000 times bigger than that's in your cell phone. You don't want that overheat to occur, and you want to make sure that that battery then is replaced. And that's the same thing with this unit. So they have a lifetime that's associated with them. We believe we can probably go longer for 10 years, but looking at it conservatively, about 10 years time. The other thing that we do is everything is modular. We believe in building very strong modular systems. So inside of that, you'll see these modules like Lego blocks. So when the system starts to fail or we have a problem, you don't have to change the entire, all the energy storage system in the pedestal. You only change minor components. So the components can be removed, and by service personnel be put back in again. This can happen within an hour or so, and they're very much up and running again. The last thing I can add to that is we add a lot of prognostic information onto it. We know how the system is being used. We know the environment it's in. We take a lot of measurements off of the cells coming through. And so we can also start to predict when failures will start to happen and when flaws start to happen. So we can be proactive in our approach. And if you remember the example that I stated with China, our business model will be relatively poor, that if anyone comes up to an EnerSys charger and every time they connect, it doesn't work. So we need to make sure that we create the most reliable network and reliable systems out there.
One of the things I think I'd also like to have you talk a little bit more about is the impact this has on the vehicles. You don't need an internal combustion engine to do a battery powered vehicle. What's it going to mean in terms of the way cars are designed, size, weight, capacity, that kind of stuff? I know this is not your territory, but you're our expert here.
I used to build these things 5 years ago before coming to EnerSys, so I could add a little bit of thoughts to the discussion. If you have, looking at it from a charging perspective, or let me maybe backtrack a little bit further. One of the reasons what's happening right now in the electric space, and people can ask themselves, well, why? Why is it right now that electric vehicles are coming on the scene? Why not? Why didn't it happen 5 years earlier? And why shouldn't it happen maybe 5 years in the future? What's so special about this point in time? What we've noticed is that the price has really gone down for lithium cells. So the cells that would have been in your laptop back in around 2000, that would have been way too expensive to build an electric car with. The technology just wasn't there. The lithium was far too expensive to be placed in. Because of volume, that price has gone down, but not only because of volume, because of the technology improvements. Almost every 30 months, we can see that more and more energy is being placed into these very small cells. I mean, you can imagine those AA cells that you buy in the grocery store, and imagine that, well, 20 years ago, my flashlight lasted for 8 hours. Well, if I look at that same sort of thinking in terms of lithium, well, today my flashlight, rather than lasting those 8 hours, will last 24 hours. We've really increased the amount of energy content that can be contained in those very small cells. So now it becomes viable to produce vehicles that can actually start to drive now 300, 400 miles on a full charge. This was very different, say, when the EV1 was produced by GM, and if anyone said, who killed the electric car, this whole conspiracy theory, there was no conspiracy theory. It was too expensive for GM to hold them because of the laws that are in place that you have to hold them for 10 years. That's why they only have release programs. That's why they retracted them. It cost them $1 million to produce every one of the vehicles. It was zero business case behind it at the time. And those vehicles lasted only less than 100 miles. Nobody wanted to buy that car. But today, a common Tesla will probably last you can drive 300 miles, and every other car manufacturer is also coming out with that. So that is starting to increase. The cost, though, is obviously still relatively high. So today, if you want to buy a vehicle and you want to save yourself a little bit of money, you can opt for a smaller battery in your electric car. But if you do that, then you will need to charge much more frequently. That has two consequences. Consequence number one is the infrastructure available for you to charge much more frequently, and hopefully EnerSys can help with that. Consequence number two is what's called cycles. Every time you cycle that battery, you put some wear on that battery. So the smaller the battery is, so even though up front you might be saving a little bit of money, in the long run, you might be pushing out a lot more money because that vehicle will have less value in 5 years' time compared to a vehicle with a larger battery in it.
Could you talk a little bit about supply chain? We keep reading articles that lithium is getting harder to get, a variety of political reasons and other reasons. Is there enough of a supply chain to be able to do this and continue this going forward?
It's a great question, and that's actually the call that I just came off of before joining this one with the federal government is to try to answer just that question and how do we gain that supply here in the United States. If we look at the overall demand curves that the OEMs are trying to promote, the automotive OEMs, in certain cases, you'll start to see that demand curve is higher than the minerals that we can produce. The biggest problem that we're seeing right now in terms of supply chain is nickel. And if in the news, this was a big story about 2.5 weeks ago, where nickel just shot up 100-fold of where it was before. It was over 100-fold. It's come back down again, and nickel is a big component of lithium batteries. For example, by the year 2025, more nickel will be used for lithium-ion batteries than it was for products like stainless steel. So you can see that all of a sudden, a brand new industry the size of stainless steel has opened up for nickel. And those refineries take time to build up. So it's not as much what we're seeing as the minerals, although the minerals and where we mine the nickel from becomes important. That's where the issue that we have right now, the travesty that's going on in Ukraine, is that we had a lot of nickel mines coming in out of Russia, and due to the sanctions, nobody wants that nickel anymore. So obviously that created the uprise in nickel pricing. And those mines are limited, obviously, where they're found. The biggest nickel mine right now is in Indonesia. But the biggest issue there is how do we refine that nickel in order then to produce the materials for those batteries? So that's really, if we look at short term, that's where that block starts to come in. If we start to push this further into about 2030, we start to see some little bit of light coming in at the end of the tunnel, and that's being used via recycling. If I look at the lead acid industry today, the industry that really was the foundation of EnerSys, it's a wonderfully recycled product. It's one of the most recycled products here in North America and also worldwide. Over 99.5% of lead acid batteries are fully recycled. That includes the lead, it includes the plastic, it includes the acid that's inside of it. It's a wonderfully recycled product. It's actually a very green product. People hear lead and they think right away toxic. They should really think about recycling when they think about lead. And so, for example, the lead that's in your car right now for your starter battery, that was likely mined in the 1970s and 1960s. And it's just gone through all of these cycles over and over again. So it's a really great technology. And what we need to do is apply the same type of thinking to lithium. We need to make sure that the lithium that we're now using in these electric cars, again, is recycled, exactly what we're doing with the lead industry. And so that means we don't have to mine it anymore. We still have to refine it. We still have to, what's called black mass, and you have to convert that back into the material that's used to create the powders for the batteries. But at least you're getting access to this. I call it the predicted tsunami. If you think about all of these gigafactories coming online and all of these millions of vehicles, you can imagine about, and I already mentioned, 8 years, 10 years from now, that those cells and those batteries, they'll start to get hot, just like your cell phone that gets hot, and that battery and that lithium starts to wear, it then will need to be recycled. And if once we put that back into the supply chain again, that'll reduce demands on our mines. But we are in a precarious position probably for the next 10 years as we start to build up that raw material to place within all the electric vehicles. I would say lithium is less of a concern. The larger concern right now is the nickel. So invest in nickel if you want to make some money.
Invest a nickel for a nickel. We've talked a lot about cars. Are there other uses? Sorry for the dog in the background. Are there other uses for the battery? I mean, you talked about forklifts at the beginning of this. Are there other places where these batteries could be employed?
Absolutely. So, I mean, obviously, we've seen them in household goods, right? For instance, our iPads, our iPhones, iWatches, they're all powered by lithium-ion batteries. We're seeing power tools. We're seeing garden equipment, even tractors now, ride-on tractors that are coming on the scene that are lithium-ion battery powered. Snow blowers. So these are all household items that today have been anywhere where you start to see all of these items, snow blower, ride-on tractor, they all have a combustion engine inside of them. Where you're starting to see combustion engines, those are all targets for electrifications. And that's a good thing. Particularly these smaller motors, they're called two-stroke engines. They're really horrible for the environment in terms of the gases that they produce as they burn. And so by replacing those with electric systems, and remember what I said about parts, way less moving parts. So those systems become much more reliable. You don't have to service them. You don't have to oil them as much. So there's a lot of reliability increases. So that's just from a household perspective. In our industry, in the industrial world, we're starting to see that certain customers require the higher usage or the higher demands that lithium allows that lead cannot, just because it doesn't have the same energy density. That first EV1 that I mentioned, it was based on lead acid batteries, and it could only drive those 80, 70 miles, even though it was stuck full of batteries. Where today, way less volume for that, you can drive that 300 miles. And that's the advantage that lithium, and it's just an electrochemical advantage that starts to come in. So we're seeing that in our spaces, we're seeing that in data centers, and of course, very importantly, is these energy storage systems. In order to create that grid resilience, in order to make sure as we add all of these wonderful electrical components onto our grid, can we do this in an intelligent way? And that's where a lot of these batteries will also find themselves in these energy storage systems.
And as you know, nobody, John Weidenhammer knows, we've talked early on about the possibility of a battery-powered train running from Reading to Philadelphia as we restore the train. So hopefully that's a dream that can come true. Let me ask you, I live in a neighborhood where a lot of people have generators because the power goes out here a lot. And other people have raised questions about relationships between these batteries and solar power. Is there a connection there that homeowners could be looking at this as some of their future as well?
Yes, absolutely. And you really have to look in areas where you see a very large dominance. So say we look at the solar problem first. For instance, in the state of Hawaii, it was at a point to the electric grid, and let me maybe backtrack a little bit. If you have all these solar panels, now think about a cloudy day and those clouds come in. So all of a sudden you have sun clouds. It's kind of like hooking in those electric vehicles and taking them out again, right? It's that power, they're called transients. And these very strong transients have very strong negative impacts onto the grid. The grid was never designed for these level of transients. And you can have issues with switches and so forth. And I'm not a full grid expert, so I'm going into over my skis and areas, but there are just very strong issues that the grid has to upgrade in order to deal with those transients. It was so much so that you weren't allowed to add solar in the state of Hawaii unless you put a battery to it. If we looked at, because the battery is able to take that electricity during the day when you're not home, and then hopefully when you do come home and the air conditioner goes on and you prepare your meals and so forth, that you can extract some of that electricity coming out of that battery system that lowers that signature and allows you to use optimally all of that solar power that you gathered during the day that no one was in your home. If we look at certain areas globally where they've had a lot higher penetration of solar power and where the electricity costs are high, countries like Germany, for instance, in the past, they put in a lot of solar power onto the roofs of the homes in order to push energy back into the grid again. Today, what we find is it's actually more valuable for the homeowner to use that electricity themselves. But again, it's a supply chain with zero inventory. You have to add that inventory. The battery provides you that inventory, that storage capability, such that you can use that electricity at nighttime when obviously the sun isn't shining. If we look at backup power, most power failures that happen in the United States are less than 2 minutes. And obviously in this case, most people may not even want to get a generator for that or anything else, and they don't care. It's just an inconvenience. They have to maybe reset their watches in their homes and their clocks in their homes. The next level of power outages that happen are that have medium level of occurrence are about 1 hour to 2 hours. This is where battery backup can provide help to most homeowners. They can supply power to critical loads, your lighting, for instance, if you have pumps in your home, so for instance, for water, all of that power can be supplied to those systems for a few hours, depending upon the size of the battery you have. There's also technologies called vehicle to grid, where your car could theoretically be used and the battery in your car to push energy back into your home again in the event of these failures. And a lot of car companies are looking at this. But if you're thinking about how do I deal with a problem with the grid being out, for instance, there's an ice storm and now I don't have power for the next 48 hours, a battery really can't help you there. It doesn't have sufficient level of power, most cases, depending upon the size of the battery, to support your house for that time period. But if you're looking at it for time periods, I'll say 1 hour to 2 hours, it makes sense to put in that energy storage. If you want to use that energy storage to optimize your power of when you want to use it, it makes sense. And then you can also think about using electric car.
Great. We've sort of reached the end. I could one more question for you, but thank you. It's so exciting to hear what this future is like, and it's nice to know that Berks County is a leader in this effort. So here's my final question for you, Jorn. 100 years ago, there was a battle between Henry Ford and Thomas Edison over what should be used to charge our cars. Should Thomas Edison have won that battle?
Let me think about it in a different way. Let me think about it. What if Thomas Edison won? And what if the future was all electric cars? And what if today someone came around and say, hey, guess what? I found this stuff under the ground and we can process it. It's going to produce these gases. It's going to heat up our planet. It's in certain areas in the world where maybe they're not so friendly. We're going to have to stick our military there, but it's really valuable. And guess what? I've got another idea. We're going to put this really flammable stuff into your car. So we're going to put, 20 gallons of this into your vehicle that's highly flammable. What do you think about that idea? Exactly.
Great answer. Thank you. Thank you. Well, Jordan, thank you very much. This is a very good, very interesting program. As I mentioned, everybody, we will be posting this on the Berks Alliance website. We'll be sending a copy to everybody who registered for the event so you can share it with other people. We'll be sharing it with BCTV. I want to do a couple brief commercials. We have a community forum coming up next week that's going to focus on housing with people from the Reinvestment Fund and Policy Maps, giving us some interesting data about the housing situation in Berks County. And 2 weeks from now, we're going to have Kevin Lugo, who is watching us today, talk about the Berks County Community Foundation Fund that supports alternative energy development, and another solar powered company that's going to be doing a presentation as well. So please join us for those. And thank you for joining us today. And hopefully you get to enjoy the rest of this beautiful day. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Take care.